Good day everyone, I'm Jessica Camera and I will discuss the topic about Pavlov classical conditioning. At the end of this discussion, the students will able to define the following. Define what is classical conditioning, differentiate the components of classical conditioning. Definition of terms. Learning is relatively permanent change in behavior due to experiences. Behaviorism emphasizes observable behavior and the environment in behavior. Conditioning. The association between environmental stimuli and the organism responses. UCS means unconditioned stimulus. UCR is the unconditioned response. NS is neutral stimulus. CR is conditioned response. CS is conditioned stimulus. Response is an act of responding. I'll discuss these things to you later on as we go further in our discussion. Conditioning in behavioral psychology is a theory that reaction or response to an object or event stimulus by a person or animal that can be modified by learning or conditioning, stimulus or response. Theories are central to principles of conditioning. They are based on the assumption that the human behavior is learned. So when we say stimulus, it is an event or sensation or experiences that causes you to react, meaning it is a change in the environment that elicits or brings about a response. Eyes. Visual stimulus, you see something and then you react. Nose. Olfactory stimulus, you smell something and then you react. Taste. Gustatory stimulus, you taste something and then you react. Hear. Auditory stimulus, you hear something and then you react. Touch. Kinesthetic stimulus, you feel something and then you react. We'll learn to associate certain acts with the responses they produce. Who is Ivan Pavlov? Ivan Petrovich Pavlov was a Russian physiologist known as primarily for his work in classical conditioning. He was awarded the degree of Candidate of Natural Sciences in 1875 and was also awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1904 in recognition of his work on the physiology of digestion. He is born on September 26, 1849 at Ryazan, Russian Empire, and he died at February 27, 1936 at the age of 86. Ivan Pavlov developed an experiment testing the concept of the conditioned reflex. Ivan Pavlov was a Russian physiologist best known in psychology for his discovery of classical conditioning. During his studies on the digestive system of dogs, Pavlov noted that the animal salivated naturally upon the presentation of a food. There are three major types of learning or conditioning. First is classical conditioning or learning through association. It is a neutral stimulus is associated with a natural responses. In the 1890s, a Russian physiologist named Ivan Pavlov did some really famous experiments on dogs. He showed dogs some food and rang a bell at the same time. After a while, the dogs would associate the bell of the food. They would learn that when they heard the bell, they would get fed. Eventually, just ringing the bell made the dogs salivate. They learned to expect food at the sound of the bell. You see, under normal conditions, we sight and the smell of a food causes a dog to salivate. We call the food an unconditioned stimulus, and we call salivation the unconditioned response. Nobody trains a dog to salivate over some stick. However, when we pair an unconditioned stimulus like food with something that was previously neutral like the sound of the bell, that neutral stimulus becomes a conditioned stimulus, and so classical conditioning was discovered. Second is the learning through consequences or operant conditioning. It is a response in increase or decrease due to reinforcement or punishment. After eating dinner with your family, you clear the table and wash the dishes. When you're done, your mom gives you a big hug and says, "Thank you for helping me." In this situation, your mom's response is positive reinforcement. If it makes you more likely to repeat the operant response, which is to clear the table and wash the dishes. Lastly, is a learning through observation, or it is a modeling or observational learning, means that learning occurs through observation and imitation of others. What is a classical conditioning? Classical conditioning is a learning process that occurs through associations between an environmental stimulus and a naturally occurring stimulus. It had a major influence on behaviorism, which is based on the assumption that learning occurs through interaction with the environment. There are 5 components of classical conditioning. The first one is the unconditioned stimulus, or UCS, a stimulus that naturally and automatically triggers a response, or it is an unconditioned means unlearned. There are 5 components of classical conditioning. The first one is the unconditioned stimulus, or UCS, a stimulus that naturally and automatically triggers a response, or it is an unconditioned means unlearned. Second is the unconditioned response, or UCR, the unlearned response that occurs naturally in response to the unconditioned stimulus. The third is neutral stimulus, or NS. It doesn't trigger any particular response at first, but when you use together an unconditioned stimulus, it can effectively stimulate learning. The fourth is conditioned stimulus, or CS, a previously neutral stimulus that when paired with an unconditioned stimulus, it triggers a conditioned response. Lastly is the conditioned response, or the CR. It means that it learns response to the previously neutral stimulus.